Good day everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to zero in on the town of Marshall here in Northern California. Marshall is a small town on Tamales Bay, which is a very close proximity to Point Reyes, where Sir Francis Drake landed, and that was in the 1500s. You should know there's lots of military clandestine activity in Marin County, and in and around the town of Marshall, the town of Point Reyes Station, Inverness, Lima, and Bolinas. Those are the key small towns. Now, I want to focus on two families specifically to give us a little historical background of the town of Marshall, which really kicked off with the Miwok Indians who got booted out of here. They still do have a Miwok cemetery. George Lucas has done his best with the Skywalker Ranch to trash the Miwok image with his fake man-made lake on the Skywalker Ranch property, which he entitled Ewok Lake. But there never were any Ewoks, there were Miwoks. But anyway, there is a Miwok cemetery. There is no Ewok cemetery because there were never any Ewoks other than in your brain if you watch the Star Wars trilogy series. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the Marconi family, which is nobility from Italy, northern Italy, and specifically want to hone in on the person who's credited with creating the radio, the inventor of the radio. We all live in a 5G, smart grid, mesh, Amazon Ring camera, radio frequency, RF radio frequency system, which I would call a prisoner planet. But it all emanated from creating the radio frequency system. So I'm going to go with Guglielmo Marconi, who was born on April 25th, 1874. Okay? And he never went to schools, as we would consider private or public schools, but his family was very wealthy, and I'll give you a little background on his parents in a minute, but essentially they didn't need him to go to school. So he was educated through tutors, private tutors in their mansions, and he became an engineer of sorts. I don't know what the credentials were back then. I don't think they had any. And he went on to create this Marconi system, which could handle Morse code signaling, which is known as tapping out spark transmitter patterns. Then I want to talk about the Bill and Ellen Straus Jewish family who got into the dairy farming business adjacent to the Marconi RCA Radio Signaling Center in the town of Marshall. So whenever I see patterns, I get curious. And turns out, you have a reason to be curious, because we always ask the question, does correlation equals causation? We're always asking that question. And the answer has always been yes. Yes, it does. So we're going to look at the Marconi family, and then we're going to look at the Ellen and Bill Straus and their eldest son, Albert Straus, who created the Marconi family Creamery in 1994. But anyway, it's quite a legacy story, so please get an adult beverage, settle in, and fasten your seatbelt, because you're going to be disturbed by what I'm going to tell you. So, all right, let's start with the inventor of the radio. Let's start with him. So, Guglielmo Marconi didn't come from under a rock. In fact, he came from Bologna, Italy, the Kingdom of Italy, in 1874, April 25th. He was born Guglielmo Giovanni Maria Marconi. He was the first Marquis of Marconi, which means nobleman. And he was the inventor. He became an inventor and electrical engineer, and he was known for his creation of a practical radio wave-based wireless telegraph system. This led to Marconi being credited as the inventor of the radio. And he shared the 1909 Nobel Prize in Physics with Carl Friedman Braun, which is a Jewish-sounding name, in recognition of their contributions for the development of wireless telegraphy. Marconi was also an entrepreneur, a businessman, and a founder of the Wireless Telegraph and Signal Company in the United Kingdom. See, the British have always got their clandestine service fingerprints on any kind of new military technology, which is what radio frequency is. It's a military system. That's primarily what it is. Just because we're using the internet to do this video doesn't mean that the Marconi nobility family cared about our communication. It's always about command and control. It's not about the peasants. We don't get a vote. We don't live in a democracy. So they're just doing whatever they want to construct the society that they want to socially engineer and censor out any alternative resistance forces. Anyway, the Wireless Telegraph and Signal Company, based in Britain, was formed in 1897, which was just 1 year before we had the Spanish-American War. To hell with Spain. Remember the Maine, and to hell with Spain in the Havana port of Cuba. And just in case you don't know what the Spanish-American War was about, it was about the United States Navy taking over the island of Cuba for the next 100 years and installing whatever dictator it wanted, whether it was General Batista or Fidel Castro. It made no difference to the Navy because they're in charge of Cuba. It was also about taking over the Philippine Islands in the South Pacific, transferring it from the Spanish to the United States Navy. All right, and then dicing it out with Japan for control over the Philippines. But that's what the Spanish-American War was all about. I believe that war lasted about a year and a half, about an 18-month war. So Marconi was an entrepreneur businessman. That's code for he was a front man for whatever the clandestine services bank-controlled financing wants to do with his radio frequency ideas. Anyway, he later changed the name from the Wireless Telegraph and Signal Company to the Marconi Company, right? In 1929, Marconi was ennobled as a Marquis by the King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy. So he became an official Marquis. And in 1931, he set up a Vatican radio for Pope Pius XI. So you got Marconi systems are being rolled out to the Vatican, to Rome, and throughout the world. It also ends up on the Titanic in 1912. The Marconi radio system with 3 rooms operated by the Marconi Company appears on the infamous Titanic on its maiden voyage. You should know that the Titanic was operated by the White Star Line management firm, and I'm not really clear on who the owners of the ship were and whether it was well insured. I'll bet it was. But the radio room, which was 3 suites, known as the silent rooms, the soundproof walls, the Marconi rooms, where they tapped out Morse code, they had 2 employees who were on duty the night of April 11th and the early morning hours of April 12th, 1912, where they tapped out rescue signals 30 minutes after the Titanic collided with an iceberg. So that was probably part of the problem, was there was a 30-minute delay before the Marconi system tapped out any messages. Anyway, let me just continue on with Guglielmo Giovanni Maria Marconi. He's the second son of Giuseppe Marconi, who is an Italian aristocrat landowner, and he married Anne Jameson, an Irish nobility class person, and she's the daughter of Andrew Jameson of the Daphne Castle in Wexford County, Ireland, and she's the granddaughter of John Jameson, who founded whiskey distillery Jameson and Sons. I'm sure we've all heard of Irish whiskey and Jameson and Sons. Personally, I prefer Scotch whiskey myself, and I'm Irish. Anyway, that's who Marconi's father married into, was nobility class in Ireland, and Marconi did not attend formal school as a child, nor did he ever go on to formal education, higher education as we call it. Instead, he learned chemistry, mathematics, and physics at home from a series of private tutors that his parents hired. His family hired additional tutors during the wintertime when they would leave Bologna for warmer climate of Tuscany or Florence. Marconi noted an important mentor was Professor Viziano Rosa, a high school physics teacher from La Verona, which I've personally visited Laverno. I've also been to Lavino and Luino. I've been to Luino, Lavino, and Livorno. It's all northern Italy near Lago Maggiore, Lago Varese, and in close proximity to Lake Garda, Verona, Italy. All right, so radio work. From youth, Marconi was interested in science and electronics. From the early 1990s, he began working on the idea of wireless telegraphy, which is the transmission of telegraph messages without connecting any wires, which was known as electronic telegraph. This is not a new idea. Many people had been looking at inventions. So again, it's not a new idea. Don't know if his ideas were stolen or borrowed, kind of like how Hollywood creates films and television shows. Anyway, I'll skip over some of this. I'll fast forward because I want to keep the video relatively short. You can do your own research. I'll provide a link below on Guglielmo Marconi. But essentially what happened is after the Titanic sunk, they continued to roll out this Marconi company. And his company opened up a radio station out north of San Francisco, not far, in Marin County, in the town of Marshall, 2 miles south of the town of Marshall, if you want to call it a town. I mean, there's probably a dozen buildings in the town of Marshall. It's not a very large town. There were probably fewer buildings in 1913. And they set up what is now the Marconi Conference Center radio transmission station. And this was done concurrently with setting up a radio station in the town of Bolinas, which is near Stinson Beach, near the Bolinas Highway below Mount Tam on the Pacific Ocean, near Point Reyes. But just so you know, it's 18 miles south from where the Marconi Center was on Tamales Bay. It's 18 and a half miles south to get to Bolinas. That was going to be a signaling transponder station, and the Marshall Marconi Center was a receiving station where I guess they'd interpret the messages. All right. And at this time, there were no radio stations deployed in Point Reyes, or what is known as the Point Reyes State Park. That's coming, but hadn't happened in 1913 yet. They officially established this center in Tamales Bay in 1914 with the purchase or arrangement of 1,000 acres of land. That's one of my main points, is there's 1,000 acres of pristine grazing property I don't think you need the whole 1,000 acres to conduct a radio frequency program, but that's what they did. So the Marconi company, which is nobility class from Italy, and he creates and incorporates a company in British intelligence, United Kingdom, and then the next thing he knows, he ends up on the bridge of the Titanic, and within 18 months, he's out in California in Tamales Bay with 1,000 acres of pristine cattle grazing land. And there he is with his company is called American Marconi. That's what they did business at in America. It was the Marconi Company internationally, but it became American Marconi when it landed in Tamales Bay, town of Marshall, in 1914. So stay with me. What happens next, right? Well, I'm skipping over some things here, but there's so much to this story. I mean, there's World War I, right? I'm going to skip over World War I, and I'm going to get us out a little bit past that. And RCA, Radio Corporation of America, appears, and they purchased the American Marconi Company in 1920. So they assume the 1,000 acres of property in Marin County. It's now controlled by RCA. They brought us, remember, RCA Victor brought us Elvis Presley and many other radio singing stars like Bing Crosby that we remembered that flew over the Marconi radio frequency system. And we get out to World War II, and RCA decided to reposition the radio station from the town of Marshall over to Point Reyes Station near the beach on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, specifically at 17,400 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. They constructed a rather sophisticated Art Deco building in 1929 to 1931. It was completed in the Point Reyes Park system, and that gets you closer to the ocean of the Pacific. It was also rumored that this is where the transmission from Honolulu, Hawaii, were sent to Point Reyes to the United States Navy and Coast Guard receiving station in Point Reyes at 17,400 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. That's where Sean Penn used to live on off San Francis Drake Boulevard near the town of Ross. That's 25 miles east of this particular location, just so you know. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that this made the Tamales Bay Marconi Center obsolete because they could do everything in Point Reyes. So they shuttered the Marconi Center in Tamales in 1931. All right. Now, during World War II, RCA and their G Ranch, or their RCA Ranch out in Point Reyes, near the town of Inverness, by the way. And Inverness, as the crow flies from, well, if you drove your car from where the Marconi station was in Marshall to where the new station was in Point Reyes, it's 18.5-mile drive. However, as the radio frequency goes, or the crow flies, it's probably 6.5-mile distance. It's a really short distance. They just moved it across Tamales Bay in a straight line. But there is no bridge, there's no paved road. You have to go around Tamales Bay. So you add, 11, 12 miles of driving because of the extra distance. But in terms of actual radio frequency distance, it was under 7 miles distance, repositioning the radio station. All right, so what happens next? RCA, during World War II, with all of its military contracts, develops the LORAN system, Long Range Aid to Navigation. They also perfect GPS, global position systems, or they worked on global positions. Now, you know these systems, LORAN and GPS, they can be used for multi-purposes. One is for a sailor of a ship in maritime law of the sea to know their position relative to ports and other islands and peninsulas. Can also be used from a controller to track the ship for GPS surveillance tracking, right? And third, it can be used to target and track for a missile attack or a airplane attack or for a kamikaze attack. Enter, Raytheon missile guidance systems, right? Do they use GPS tracking to surveil, or do they use it to target and track targets, military targets? Like smart grid neighborhoods, for example. Anyway, I'm just saying that whenever you enter a smart grid, you are being GPS tracked and targeted, which means the radio frequencies can be pulsed in your direction, or they can even be turned off. By the way, today's another chemtrail day. Every day is a chemtrail day. If you don't hear me say we didn't have any chemtrails today, you'll know that it's not a chemtrail day. But since I don't ever say that, it's because every single day is a chemtrail day in Sonoma and Napa and Marin County. And anybody who denies it is a moron and an enemy of the people. But I'm here to tell you they have low-flying fixed planes that go with those military planes at 25,000 feet. They got planes at 1,000 feet over my head that give me a headache. And they're obviously coordinated. So whether they're checking the air quality or pollution level, or whether they're just helping with the wind direction, I don't know. But I can tell you that they have small aircraft that seem to be teamed up with the KC-135s or the KC-10 extended, which is double the capacity of a KC-135. And they're all flying them. The military planes are flying out of Travis Air Force Base in Solano County and Fairfield. The low-flying planes, I believe, are flying out of local airports in Sonoma, Napa, and Marin counties. Just threw that in there. So things went quiet in the town of Marshall until Bill and Ellen Straus arrived. So we're going to pivot now to 1941 when Bill and Ellen Straus appeared in the town of Marshall to create what is now known as the Straus Family Dairy Farm. Now this is, I'm going to read you their history, but I'm telling you there's a lot of applied linguistics in this story I'm going to tell you, which is called the Straus Family Legacy, which I'm going to call the Clandestine Service, Jewish Operative, UC Berkeley, UC Davis, Social Engineering of our farming, of our food, of our zero carbon footprint messaging. Bill and Emily Straus, the journey to Northern California coast, aka Tamales Bay, town of Marshall. Straus Family Creamery founder and CEO, their eldest son, Albert Straus, is the eldest son of Bill and Emily Straus. Bill, the father, the patriarch, began his dairy in the early 1940s, before Pearl Harbor, just before Pearl Harbor, in the town of Marshall on the beautiful shores of Tamales Bay. Ellen, his wife, joined him in 1950 when they married. She's back in New York. She was from Amsterdam, and she fled the Nazis to New York City. Bill fled the Nazis from Hamburg, Germany, and he went to Czechoslovakia, and from Czechoslovakia he went to Palestine. Let me just help you with that. Jerusalem. He went to Israel, Jerusalem, the holy city of Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem he went to Los Angeles, and then he went to San Luis Obispo, and then he went to University of California, Berkeley, and University of California, Davis, which features and focuses on agriculture. It's the agriculture UC campus. He did that in 1937 until 1941 when he graduated. And in 1941, he was granted, gifted 500 acres of land adjacent to RCA's property off Marshall Petaluma Road in the town of Marshall. I know this road intimately. So I got the dairy farm on the north side of the road, and I got an RCA military complex on the south side of the road. It's a road that has no center line. It's rather rough. It's rather rural. It's very steep. It's undulating, and there's no center line. It's a county road. Now I got a dairy farm that looks like it's going to be managed by the University of California Systems. And you got the Straus Jewish family. They have a ranch house at 22888 Pacific Coast Highway 1. That's the ranch house for the family, 22,888, which is just north of the town of Marshall, 2 miles north, and near Nix Cove. And again, 2 miles south of Marshall, you have the Marconi Conference Center, which has been shuttered at this time. Stay with me. What happens next? Well, things are, I'm sure things are happening, but they're developing. The Straus family is teaching their children how to milk cows, I guess, and how cows graze on 500 acres of land. How they got it, I don't know. Albert Straus and his 3 siblings were greatly influenced by their parents, Bill and Ellen Straus, who were very early environmentalists. Let me translate for you. They were doing what the University of California Clandestine Services told them to do, which is to do climate control, global warming narratives. Bill Straus was born just as the First World War in 1914 broke out. He was born in Hamburg, Germany. In 1934, inspired by his father's profession of, I guess, dairy farming, he set out with a group of young Jews who were involved in the Zionist agricultural youth movement. I didn't know there was such a thing as Zionist agriculture. I just thought there was agriculture. I didn't know it had anything to do with being Jewish. Anyway, taking a series of hands-on agricultural courses in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, he then transferred over to transferred over to Palestine, aka Jerusalem, and then he somehow, with money I don't know from where, Bill and his mother, they were in Jerusalem in 1936, and then by 1937 he's in California exploring farmland in San Luis Obispo County. And he immediately attends University of California, Berkeley, and then Davis. And then, according to this propaganda piece, he purchased a small dairy in Tamales Bay. Well, 500 acres is not small, and he doesn't have the money to do that. So I'm saying the clandestine service has made that farm possible. The dairy was on the outskirts of the hamlet of Marshall, which I told you is like a 12-building town. It's situated on the eastern shore of Tamales Bay. Feel free to Google it. And he started farming with 23 Jersey cows, which he named after family members and friends. He was an innovative dairyman, the first to adopt environmentally sound agricultural practices. Yeah, whatever UC Systems tells him to do, that's what he's going to do. Ellen Straus, who was born Ellen Preens in 1927, she was born in Amsterdam, Holland. And in February 1940, she and her family fled to New York City just ahead of the Nazi invasion of Holland. Wow, I guess somebody tipped her off when the invasion was coming, right? Anyway, they skipped over how she met her husband, Bill Straus, but she had a 10-year window whilst he was going to school. Remember, Bill Straus is actually very busy going to University of California Systems during 1937 to 1941, so I'm not really clear on when they could have dated until after he acquired his farm in 1941. He had about 9 years, I guess, to somehow leave the farm, go to New York, and find Ellen, who he married. So this is confusing to me. I think Ellen was maybe put with him in some kind of a partnership. I don't know how Ellen Preens ever met Bill Straus, who shares the same name as Joseph Straus, who has a statue at the south anchorage of the Golden Gate Bridge, a bridge that Joseph Straus did not design. He's not the structural engineer. He's the planning architect. All right. As an avid environmentalist and farmer, Ellen, of course, will be remembered along with her friend Phyllis Faber, another Jewish lady. They founded MALT, the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, MALT. And you should know, this is very important, that they have that was created sometime in 1980, around the time George Lucas was purchasing the Bulltail Ranch in 1978-79. Phyllis a botanist, Phillips Favor and Ellen Straus, form MALT, Marin Agricultural Land Trust, which I believe is a clandestine service nonprofit. They've acquired 92 ranches in the last 40 years, okay? 92 ranches, including part of George Lucas's Skywalker properties, including Metallica's properties with the Luis Ranch, and part of Fred Cordova watershed up against Stafford Lake has been transferred into the MALT nonprofit. They have 55,000 acres now. So originally, when Ellen moved to California, she knew what 500 acres looked like. But after 40 years of work, they have over 55,000 acres transferred into a nonprofit land trust. I find this highly suspicious. This definitely goes against the way things normally work, right? And then, of course, in 1994, their eldest son, Albert, opens up the Straus family Creamery, which is located on the RCA property off of Marshall Petaluma Road, approximately 8 miles from the family ranch house. And I find this more than a coincidence. This is the Marconi property that the Straus family Creamery borders. It also borders what is called the Marin County Motorcycle Club land, which I believe is controlled by the state of California under some kind of a lease agreement. That property is not used much for motorcycling, but you can pay $450 a year to be in the club. There's a 10-year waiting list to get in there. It's all very suspicious to me, people. Land is coveted here in California, even though we have so much of it. This is what gets me crazy, is that we have so much land, but you can't access most of it. Drives me crazy. All right, so you should also know that in 1965, somebody, I don't know who, moved Charles Dietrich's Church of Synanon into the Marconi Conference Center, which is located, if you want the address to Google, it's 18,500 Pacific Coast Highway. That's where the Marconi Conference Center is, and what is called the Marconi Hotel, to celebrate the inventor of the radio, the Marquis Marconi. Anyway, from 1965 to 1980, the Church of Synanon operated there, as well as in Santa Monica at an armory. In 1967, they moved into a hotel in Santa Monica. And in 1965, they also moved into the Athens Gymnasium in Oakland, city of Oakland, across the bay from the Church of Synanon in Marin County. That's 3 locations. That's a CIA operation, the Church of Synanon and Charles Dietrich. And there it is in the town of Marshall for 15 years. 15 years, you have a cult. It's a cult. It's a version of the Alcoholics Anonymous, but you have to shave your head, and you can't leave, and you take an oath of poverty, an oath of obedience. So it's not that different than the Sacred Heart Order or the Jesuits, right? But it's called the Church of Synanon, and it's right next door, neighbors with Bill and Ellen Straus. The Church of Synanon, and I don't think they have anything to say about it because the clandestine service is running the show. And I think they're running the Straus family dairy also. But they're definitely running the Church of Synanon. Right there out of Marshall at, what did I say? 18,500 Pacific Coast Highway 1. And the Straus family ranch house is at 22,888 Pacific Coast Highway, 4 miles north of the Marconi Conference Center. All right, I think I've told you everything that I needed to tell you here. Is I've got GPS tracking systems, radio frequency, dairy farmers. There's a lot. I'm going to put a link below to Albert's interview regarding the University of California, Berkeley approached him regarding a zero footprint on the dairy farm. I find this extremely disturbing that Albert Straus and the Straus family Creamery are now going to be following UC Berkeley suggestions as to how to create a family farm to produce milk under a carbon footprint project. That's code for they receive money from the UC Berkeley systems and UC Davis systems, which is clandestine money. So you got a family farm that is promoted as an organic farm with no pesticides, and it's receiving money from the CIA banks. So that's the way it is. If you're taking money from University of California system, like Stanford University takes money for their linear accelerator, then you work for CIA. University of California, Berkeley gets paid for the Department of Energy to run the Lawrence Livermore Weapons Lab. That makes UC Berkeley a CIA operation. That makes UC Davis a CIA operation under zero carbon footprint, climate control, climate change, chemtrails above, while they manufacture the weather. All right, that's my show for today. I'll provide the links below. Please post your comments and questions. And this is the world we live in, people. They have 55,000 acres, pristine, beautiful property in Marin County that you really don't have access to. 92 ranches taken over a 40-year period. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.